That happened in a couple of years back when I got a chance to show my kids the snowy wonderland I grew up in, the kind of winter magic they'd never experienced living in Texas. My son, Kyle, was 8, and my daughter, Lila, was 6 back then. They'd never seen snow like this before, real snow, the kind that blankets everything in silence and turns the world into a glittering, frozen playground. I wanted them to love it the way I did when I was a kid. But I also wanted to keep things simple, flexible. No remote cabins, no roughing it in the wilderness. Just car camping. We'd stay warm, stay mobile, and stay close to nature without committing to anything too extreme. We drove up to my hometown in the northern part of the state, a place I hadn't been back to in years. The roads were icy, and the trees were heavy with snow. I'd packed the SUV with everything we'd need: thick blankets, a portable heater, hot cocoa mix, and enough food to keep us fed for a few days. The plan was to set up near a quiet, forested area, just far enough from town to feel secluded but close enough to civilization that we wouldn't be completely cut off. The first night was perfect. We built a small campfire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories under the stars. The kids were wide-eyed, their breath visible in the cold air as they laughed and played. Kyle, especially, was fascinated by the snow. He kept running his hands through it, packing it into balls and throwing it at Lila. The next morning, I woke up early to get the fire going again. The air was too cold, and the sun was just starting to rise. Kyle and Lila were still asleep in the back of the SUV, bundled up in their sleeping bags. I started preparing breakfast bacon and eggs on the portable stove, while the kids slowly woke up and stumbled out of the car, rubbing their eyes and complaining about the cold. "Dad, can we go play in the snow?" Kyle asked, his voice still groggy but eager. "After breakfast," I said, flipping a strip of bacon. "And stay close, okay? Don't wander off." He nodded, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. He was already itching to explore. Lila, on the other hand, was more interested in staying close to the fire, sipping her hot cocoa and watching the steam rise from her mug. After we ate, I let them play while I cleaned up. Kyle ran off toward the trees, while Lila stayed nearby, building a small snowman. I kept an eye on them as I worked, but I wasn't worried. The area seemed safe, and I could hear Kyle laughing as he ran around. But then, at some point, I realized I hadn't heard him in a while. I stopped what I was doing and looked around. Lila was still there, focused on her snowman, but Kyle was nowhere in sight. "Kyle?" I called out. Then I called out again. No answer. "Kyle," I shouted louder, my heart starting to race. Still, nothing. I dropped the pan I was holding and ran toward the trees, scanning the snow for any sign of him. My mind was racing. How long had it been? 5 minutes? 10? The forest was dense, and the snow was deep. If he'd wandered too far, he could get lost. Or worse. Then I saw a few feet away there. I last saw him playing. Small footprints leading away from the campsite and into the woods. I followed them, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The tracks were fresh, and they led straight toward the creek that ran through the area. My stomach dropped. The creek was partially frozen, but the ice wasn't thick enough to hold anyone's weight. If Kyle had fallen in, I broke into a run, following the footprints as fast as I could. The snow made it hard to move quickly, and my boots sank with every step. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the cold air burning my lungs. When I reached the creek, I stopped dead in my tracks. The footprints led right up to the edge, and then they stopped. There was no sign of Kyle on this side of the water. I looked across the creek, my eyes scanning the snowy bank on the other side. And there he was. Kyle was standing there, perfectly fine, looking around like nothing was wrong. Oh my God, I found him, but I was terrified and confused too. How the hell had he gotten across? The creek wasn't wide, but it was too deep and too icy for an 8-year-old to cross safely. There was no bridge, No fallen log, nothing. Cow, I shouted. What are you doing over there? How did you get across? He looked up at me, his face calm, almost blank. A clown took me, he said, his voice matter of fact. He gave me candies. My blood ran cold. What? What the hell are you talking about? A clown, he repeated, as if it were the most normal thing to him. He carried me across. I stare at him, my mind struggling to process what he'd just said. A clown? Out here? In the middle of nowhere? It didn't make any sense. I didn't wait. I plunged into the creek, the icy water soaking through my boots and jeans as I waded across. The cold was shocking, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was getting to Kyle and getting him back to safety. When I reached the other side, I grabbed him by the shoulders and knelt down in front of him. Kyle, listen to me. This is important. Did someone take you? Did someone touch you? He shook his head. No. He just carried me across and gave me candies. Then he left. I was shivering with terror in this isolated place, feeling the panic rising in my chest. I looked around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, any sign of this so-called clown or whatever it was. But the forest remained silent. Let's go, I said. We're leaving. Now. I grabbed Kale's hand and started walking back toward the creek, retracing our steps. As we crossed the water again, then what I saw was so horrifying, I noticed the footprints in the snow. Kale's small ones, and next to them, larger ones. Adult-sized. My stomach churned. Someone had been here. Someone had taken my son, carried him across the creek, and then… What? Let him go. Given him candy? Why? What the hell was going on? When we got back to the campsite, Lila was still there. I just started packing up as fast as I could. Dad, what's wrong? Lila asked. Nothing, I lied. We're just going home early, okay? I called the police as soon as we had service. They sent a unit to the area, but after that, I don't know what happened. That same day, I left the place, not wanting to know whether they found anyone or not. We never went back to that place. Kyle never talked about it again. It was like it never happened. But one thing I still don't understand: who was that clown, and what did he want from my child? I feel like I arrived just in time. Otherwise, he might have kidnapped my child. Those days, I was watching van life videos. You know, the ones Instagram perfect shots of people living out of their vans, parked in the cold, icy weather, surrounded by snow-capped mountains and pristine forests. Me and my buddy, Jax, got hooked on that during college. We'd sit in our crappy apartment near campus, scrolling through these videos, dreaming about the freedom, the adventure, the whole off-the-grid vibe. Jax was my roommate, and we'd been tight since freshman year. And this van life thing? It was next level. We'd watch these people surviving in the icy cold, staying cozy in their vans, cooking meals. It looked easy, fun even. That winter, we decided to test our survival skills. We picked a spot in the icy mountains of Green Mountain National Forest. Our plan was to drive up, park the van, and spend a couple of nights living the van life dream. We'd hike during the day, cook our meals at night, and sleep in the van when it got too cold. The roads were slick with ice, and the snow was coming down hard. By the time we reached the spot we'd picked, the van was struggling to make it through the snowdrifts. We finally parked and stepped out into the freezing cold. The snow was deep, knee-high in some places. We set up a small campfire, cooked some canned soup on the stove, and huddled in the van for the night. It was freezing, even with the sleeping bags and blankets we brought. I don't think either of us slept more than a couple of hours. The next morning, we woke up to a world covered in white. The snow had stopped, but the temperature had dropped even more. Jax and I tried to make the best of it. We cooked breakfast, and even attempted to hike a little. But the snow was too deep and the cold was too much. By midday, we were both miserable. "This was a terrible idea," Jack said, his teeth chattering as he stirred the fire. "No shit," I shot back. "But we're here now. Might as well tough it out." We spent the rest of the day trying to stay warm, but it was a losing battle. The fire kept dying. The van was freezing. By the time night fell, we were both ready to call it quits. "Screw this," Jack said as we sat in the van, shivering under our blankets. "Let's pack up and leave first thing in the morning." I didn't say no to him. The van life dream was dead, and we just wanted to go home. The next morning, we woke up early and started packing up. The cold was even worse than the day before, and the snow was coming down again. Jax went off to take a piss while I finished loading the van. I was just about to call him back when I heard him shout, "Yo, man, get over here." I ran over to where he was standing, near the edge of the trees. He was staring into the forest, his face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. "There's a dude out there," he said. "He's just standing there, watching us." I followed his gaze and saw him, a man, maybe 50 yards away, standing between the trees. He was wearing a heavy coat, gloves, and a ski mask that covered his entire face. In his hands was a rifle, pointed at the ground. My heart skipped a beat. "What the hell?" "I don't know," Jack said. "I was just standing here, and I looked up, and there he was. He hasn't moved." We stood there for a moment, staring at the guy. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, watching us. "Hey, man," I called out, "we're just camping. We don't want any trouble." No response. "Maybe he's a hunter," Jack said. "In this weather? With a ski mask on?" I shot back. "No way." This looked really creepy. Something felt off, I told my friend. I didn't feel right about it. There was a strange vibe. We should have left last night instead of waiting for morning. The guy still didn't move. "Let's just get out of here," Jack said. And we started backing away slowly, keeping our eyes on the guy. But as soon as we turned to leave, he raised the rifle. Oh my God, he was holding a rifle. "Run," Jax shouted. We took off, sprinting through the snow as fast as we could. That bastard fired a shot straight at us. The sound was so loud that my ears rang. I felt the bullet whiz past me, hitting a tree just to my left, splintering the bark and sending chunks of wood flying. "Holy shit," I yelled, my heart pounding in my chest. We kept running, our boots sinking into the snow with every step. Another shot rang out, and this time I felt something hit the back of my jacket. I didn't stop to see what it was, I just kept running. My only thought was to get back to the van. We finally reached the van and locked the doors. Jack started the engine, and we peeled out of there. We drove for miles before we finally stopped at a gas station and called the cops. They searched the entire area and called us back that day to give a full report. They said they found footprints at the site, but there were no clear signs to follow for further tracking. They didn't find anything else, nor were they able to catch anyone. However, they assured us that they would keep this investigation a priority. But it's been a long time now, and we haven't received any follow-up calls from them. That night, back in our apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't sleep much after that. It messed me up, man. Still does. We never went back to that spot. Hell, we sold the van a few months later. Van life wasn't for us. And I wonder who the hell was that guy? And what would have happened if we hadn't run? That day, I felt the terrifying closeness of death. The bullet struck the tree right next to me. So, it's August 2020. Carter Wilkes, just a small-time YouTuber with a passion for solo camping and adventure, decide I'm gonna do something big for my channel. A solo overnight truck camping trip deep in Baxter State Park, Maine. Just me, my camera, and miles of untouched wilderness. I load up my truck with the essentials tent, sleeping bag, some food, my camera gear, and, of course, my GoPro. I leave town around 3:30 p.m., figuring I'll have enough time to find a good spot before sundown. Baxter State Park is about 45 miles away from where I'm staying, so I crank up the music and hit the road. It's all good vibes, windows down, cool breeze, that perfect golden hour light streaming through the trees. By the time I pass through the main park entrance, it's around 4:45 p.m. But I don't stop there. Nope. I want solitude. I want the kind of isolation that makes you feel like the last person on earth. So, I keep driving deeper and deeper into the park. The main road turns into dirt, kicking up dust behind me. My truck bumps over rocks and potholes as I push further in, passing fewer and fewer cars. After about 25 miles and another solid hour of driving, I finally find what I'm looking for, a tiny, off-the-grid clearing, hidden between thick pines, completely cut off from any sign of human life. It's 6:15 p.m. when I finally park my truck. The sun is already starting to dip, casting these long shadows that make everything look 10 times creepier. But I shake it off. I've done this before. I hop out, stretch my legs, and take in the eerie silence. No wind, no birds, just nothing. I grab my camera and start filming. I film my surroundings, the truck, my gear. Takes me about 20 minutes to get everything set up, camp chair out. Quick tour of the area, a little before segment for the video. Around 6:45 p.m., I decide to cook some food. Just some simple canned stuff. I sit by my truck, eating straight from the can, watching the last bit of daylight bleed out of the sky. By 8:30 p.m., it's pitch black. No moon, no stars. Just darkness swallowing everything around me. I've got my flashlight, but it barely cuts through the thick trees. The only sound is the occasional rustling of leaves, probably just the wind. Or at least, that's what I tell myself. Around 9:15 p.m., I decide to crawl into the truck. No way in hell am I setting up a tent in the open. I lock the doors, roll up the windows, and set up my sleeping bag in the back seat. It's quiet. Too quiet. I film a quick segment for my video. All right, guys, turning in for the night. Let's hope nothing comes knocking. I chuckle nervously, but deep down, something already feels off. I doze off around 10 p.m., but sleep doesn't last long. Somewhere around 2:30 a.m., I wake up to the sound of gravel crunching. My heart slams against my ribs. I hold my breath. The sound is slow, deliberate, like footsteps. Not an animal, not the wind. Someone or something is walking around my truck. I grab my GoPro with shaking hands and hit record. My mind is racing. But then, click. The sound of my door handle being tested. I almost scream. My whole body goes rigid. Someone is out there, right outside my truck, trying to get in. I stay dead silent, barely daring to breathe. The handle jiggles again, this time more forcefully. My hands are slick with sweat as I grip my camera, my brain screaming at me to do something, anything, but I can't. I'm paralyzed. Then the sound moves. Footsteps circling the truck. Slow. Dragging. Whatever's out there, it knows I'm inside. And it's not leaving. For the next 20 minutes, I sit there, frozen in sheer, gut-wrenching terror as this thing, this person, this whatever the hell it is, paces around my truck. Sometimes stopping. Sometimes tapping on the glass. I can barely see through the condensation on the windows, but I swear I see handprints smeared across the glass. At one point, it stops, stands completely still, and then A long, slow scrape against the truck's body. I nearly piss myself. I don't know how, but I stay silent. I don't move. I don't breathe. And then just like that, the footsteps fade. The presence vanishes. I sit there, waiting, listening. Every minute stretches into an eternity. My heart doesn't slow down. Then when I saw, it was exactly 5:53 a.m. when the first light clawed through the trees. I don't waste a second. The second there's enough light to see, I grab my keys, turn the ignition, and floor it out of there. I hit a main road. I finally pull over. Stepping out, my stomach twists. My truck, my brand new freaking truck, is covered in scratches. Deep, jagged ones, running along the doors, the windows. And then I see the worst part: handprints. Dozens of them, streaked across the glass like someone or something had been pressing their hands against it all night. I didn't touch it, just vomited bile into the ferns. I never called the cops, never reported it. And I swear to God, I will never go back there again. It was a risky day for me. Just for the sake of a video, I went through the most dangerous and terrifying night of my life, something I had never experienced before. But one thing I learned from that night is to always carry a weapon for the worst-case scenarios.